Okay, so the medical advancements made in the past century can be attributed to many things like technology advancements, better state of living, and all that. But you can't ignore the fact that animal testing was used to get there. And with that, I think that we need to recognize that it should be continued in the future.
There's many more. There's a lot of things that people don't see going into animal testing, and they don't see the side. They only see the results. They don't see what actually goes on behind the scenes. And animals are tortured with toxic chemicals and diseases, and then are most of the time left to rot in cages or are killed shortly after experimentation and given no life after animal testing.
Right? Well, some of the reasons why we should continue using animal testing is because in an article written by Stanford Medicine, they talked about how animals will actually share, rodents specifically, 98% of DNA with humans, and it'll give us an accurate test on different medicines and other medical technologies that we would test on them without risking the lives of humans. Another reason that should be recognized when we look at this is that in an article written by the National Association of Biomedical Research titled The Importance of Animal Testing and Research, it speaks about how animals are actually used to test many different things because you can look at them as a whole organism with multiple organs, and rather than just looking at under a microscopic lens of just a cell or specific tissues that people use as alternatives to animal testing. A third reason why it should be done and continued is because that in the book titled The Use of Laboratory Animals in Medical and Behavioral Research, published in 1988, it speaks about how much it's helped with the past, finding cures and treatments for AIDS, polio, cardiovascular, and renal treatment, and then also even some advancements in transplants and how we go about that. And that's all proven to be effective in the past. There's no good reason to stop using it for the future. And my fourth and final reasoning on why we should continue this use of animal testing is because it is a lot safer than using humans, because I think everybody in the world would rather agree that a rat, rabbit, or what have you should die rather than a human based off of a medical test.
Okay, so my first reason would for I got it from the Humane Society of the United States, and the title is "Taking Suffering Out of Science." Animals are deliberately tortured with chemicals and diseases, and it's against their will. They shouldn't have to be put through that over and over again and then left to die afterwards. They could at least be given some sort of life afterwards. Second reason is also from the Humane Society of the United States, but it's titled "Non-Animal Methods." There are much better animal alternative or non-animal alternatives, and that are more cost-effective. They provide more accurate results than you would with animals, and it's using um, human cells and tissues that are 3D printed, and they're using computer technology to kind of model how the test would go better, so we don't have to use animals. Third reason would be Lone Star. It's from Lone Star College, titled "Save the Animals, Stop Animal Testing." It violates animals' rights. Um, Animals are given very little rights as it is, and it's not okay that we take their basic right from them from the start with animal testing by sending them through torture and pain just for our benefit. Fourth reason is from Humane Society International, titled "Animal Tests Often Miss the Most Important Signs of Toxicity in Humans." Animal tests aren't accurate enough. For how long we've been doing them, they should be more accurate, and it's not worth the cost and pain that the animals have to go through in order to provide a semi-decent result of testing, we could be using other non-animal alternatives to get better results.
Well, you talked about animals being tortured with chemicals and left to die. Stanford Medicine, in the article Why Animal Research, talks about how animals that are tested on are actually well maintained in a safe and controlled environment, often living better lives than they would out in the wild being hunted by prey and that kind of stuff and struggling to compete for food and stuff. I understand that you see it as chemical and torture, but the other aspects of life give a much higher quality than that when fighting for resources out in the wild.
But opposing that would say over 50 million animals are killed each year through animal testing in the U.S. So, I mean, whether in the wild they would have a chance at least, but when you put them through this animal testing, most of the time they end up dying.
How many are used for testing overall, though? What percentage is actually dying?
Now I just don't know that fact.
Right.
Like you're saying, 50 million of them are killed, but how many are we using?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how many.
Yeah. And I don't know either to say if it's a good or bad percentage. And then as for the non-animal alternatives, using human cells, 3D models, and computer simulations, basically. The importance of animal testing research, that article by the National Association for Biomedical Research, reviews that directly when they talk about how even though you can observe it in like cells and stuff, you won't see it as a full system of organs working together. You know, you'll see how it affects one cell or one type of tissue, but you won't see where if you put in an animal, it's gonna cause some damage to the liver, which is also gonna lead to some of the
Could affect
chemicals going somewhere else in the body and taking care of that. So it's like although you can do it there, also by doing it with alternative ways, that's ensuing perfect and man-controlled situations. Whereas if we use animals, it's nature-controlled because nothing is 100% consistently out in nature or in human lives. Not everybody has the same way that their body works down to a T and like don't live in the same environment, that kind of stuff.
But you could say the same for animals. Like not all animals are the same either. Like
Agreed, but that's why it's not just one specific animal getting tested with all the other stuff. You know, you're not gonna shoot up one animal with a piss ton of drugs because then the drugs are gonna counteract themselves inside the animal. Which is why they have a vast number of animals being tested, and once again causing multiple casualties because there's so many different things where we test it as one individual thing or another, and then I'm sure that down the line they start cross-testing, seeing if it's okay to use two different kinds of medicines at the same time, and that's such.
Yeah.
And then, as for your non-animals right or your animal right violation and stuff like that, I get it, but your alternative to that would be some might see it as go to human testing with volunteers. Whereas even that could be dangerous because even though you volunteer, it can get hairy. But also, animal testing isn't just it doesn't just reap human profit in the aspect. Whereas through animal testing, they can find ways that will help animal quality of life and veterinary clinics and that kind of stuff being able to put different drugs into there as a byproduct.
Diseases that might also affect humans
Yes.
and animals at the same time.
Right, because a lot of animals will experience cancer, just like they can experience cancer and other similar issues that humans will experience. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Doing animal research.
These non-animal methods of testing are much more cost effective if you're going that route, cost effective. They did the Humane Society International, cost of animal testing. They did I pulled one fact from the website just for an example, and it said they did sister chromatid experiments, and they did with animal testing. It cost $22,000 for experiment,
Okay.
and they did it's called in vitro testing is the name for it.
Yep.
But it's just human tissues that are generated in cells in human tissues. They use that, and it costs $8,000, which is a $14,000 difference for the same experiment.
Right, but at what point? At what point are you gonna? Well, 2 points on this, I guess. At what point do you sacrifice some of the cost for effectiveness? If it was equally effective, I definitely understand why you'd use that. But at the same time, how many procedures are all procedures 100% going to be cheaper to do it the other route and just as effective? Because it's part and to your to your argument, I get it that like animals you have to feed, take care of, keep alive and whatnot. You can't. It's not as easy to just grab them so much where you can take human tissue. Where like yeah, you have to still make sure it stays alive, but cost effectiveness, I get it. But you also have to keep in mind the effectiveness of this test. At what point is it okay to spend an extra 14,000 if we're going to get more definitive results? The other thing that you mentioned was that animal tests miss important signs in humans. Although I understand and recognize that it isn't 100% accurate, Stanford Medicine in their Why Animal Research article shared that rodents will share 98% of DNA, and right along with that, they listed cancer was the main example that stuck out to me because we're still working on trying to find a cure for that. But animals will still experience that, and multiple others that I cannot remember. But it's diseases like that where even though it isn't 100% true to what humans are going to be experiencing, it's close enough to the point where you'll see if medical treatment will cause that in an animal, or if an animal already has that, if there's a way to cure it using different kinds of testing.
In a way that, well, this is from Humane Society International, titled "Animal Tests Often Miss the Most Important Things," like you said. Scientists did an experiment with, I think it was rats, with they were experimenting the chemicals in Tupperware, like where you put your leftovers in, and then they'd give the rats all these chemicals at once, and it's not accurate enough because when we don't, so over time as you're using this Tupperware to put your food in and then you eat out of it, you're slowly ingesting these chemicals that are in the Tupperware, like the plastic. But when the scientists did the experiment, they just injected all the chemicals into the rats right away.
Right.
They didn't give over time the slow effect. Like there's going to be a different result rather if I stab you with these chemicals right away. Obviously, it's going to you're going to see results much faster. But the human body could maybe not deteriorate, but things could go wrong
over time that we don't pick up.
Over time, we wouldn't pick it up as fast as if it was the same experiment. Looking for it's not the same thing. You know what I mean? They just inject the animal, but when we slowly take it, they just bam.
Right. And
that's why it's inaccurate because it's not fast. They're not
Right, but with that, you use your alternative forms of testing in human tissue. You introduce that tissue to all these chemicals at once. You're not going to get accurate tests anyway. That doesn't sound like an issue.
It can go both ways.
Right. It's kind of one of those that doesn't seem an issue like using. That just seems like a bad experiment on whoever performed.
But if we're gonna get the same results from using the tissue, the human tissues that are 3D generated,
right?
Why would we torture an animal with it if we can use a cheaper result, or a cheaper experiment that gives you the same result with that? But we're using
you know?
We're torturing an animal with that
Right.
instead of when we could use this alternative option, which is doesn't cause any torture and suffering and is more cost effective.
Right. I mean, you got me there. Not to mention, it is, if you pull the human tissue, it is just, I mean, it's 100% human. You know, you're not guessing. So I guess that makes perfect sense. But yeah, no, I think that would be it.
Pretty much sums all of our stuff, my stuff up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything else, but
No, not really.
okay.